Welcome to Don't Shout at the Telly, Change the Message on It, with me, your host, Vivita Sequeira. Today's topic is feminism and whether we need it. We are delighted to have with us Dr. Joanna Williams. Joanna is the educational editor at the online magazine Spike and author of the excellent book, Consuming Higher Education, Why Learning Can't Be Bought. Well, without further ado, Joanna, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. I think everybody must have noticed that feminism is having a bit of a moment nowadays. Every time you turn on the television or pick up a newspaper, there seems to be a different story about feminism. So recently, Charlotte Proudman has been in the news complaining about the fact that someone sent her a message via LinkedIn saying that she looked stunning, and she complained that this objectified women and was typical of the casual misogyny that's there in society. We've had Jeremy Corbyn in the news. He's been criticised, first of all, for not having enough women in his shadow cabinet, and then he was criticised for having plenty of women but not putting them in the most powerful positions. Before that, he had suggested himself that women should have segregated train carriages to protect them from all the misogynistic abuse and the rape culture that's there on trains. We've had Chrissie Hynde, the singer with the Pretenders, in the news. She was criticised a lot for her views on rape. Women and feminism have been in the news complaining about adverts on the tube, and this idea that we live in a society where there's everyday sexism is really very prevalent. And I think if you listened to all of those news stories, you'd assume that we lived in a world where women were really oppressed and downtrodden. And in actual fact, the reality couldn't be more different. There's never been a better time to be female. Women are doing better at school, more women are going to university than men, and that's been the case since 1992. So for many, many years now, you've had more women going to university and doing the full range of subjects at university, science subjects included. More women have been entering professions like medicine and law. So that means that they've been getting better paid jobs. So the gender pay gap for young women is non-existent. In fact, for women under the age of 30, and particularly with people who are working part-time, there is a gender pay gap, but it's against men. Women under 30 working part-time earn 8% more than men. Women are doing really, really well. And one thing I'm quite interested in perhaps teasing out this afternoon is why then there's this disjuncture between the rhetoric that we hear in the news all around us about what it's like to be a woman and the reality. And it seems that the thing that's really holding women back nowadays is actually feminism. It's this view that we're all victims, that we are living in this world where women are totally oppressed, and everything from adverts to the jobs that we might go into to when we turn on our computers and get LinkedIn messages is out to oppress us. And this representation of women as victims, I think, is something which is really unhelpful and is really holding women back nowadays.
Was feminism ever the solution for the problem? It seems like the men were always the problem and in patriarchy. And for example, when then I read Engels, and he said it was women's place in the family. It was the fact that she was excluded from political life because she was restricted to the home. It seems like the new feminism movement has taken this idea that men are the problem to the next level. So it's no longer about achieving equality and being part of the men's world. It's about restructuring and reshaping the men's world. And often that is shown through the demonization of men's traits. So, for example, men are too brutal, frontal. You want a sort of nicer and kinder type of politics.
I just wanted to pick up on what you said about Jeremy Corbyn and the train carriages, which I think was misrepresented in most media articles. He didn't suggest that we should have women-only train carriages. He was working with opinion polls from women in London about whether they'd experienced sexual harassment on their way home or using transport. And he was suggesting that, it's unacceptable that we live in a society where women should have to, for example, take different modes of transport or change their route home because they do feel physically threatened by males that they may have or may encounter on their way home.
Yeah. And because I think that's one of the problems I find with today's feminism is that they analyse every single human relationship through the framework of violence. It's a completely horrible view of human beings. And I find that extremely problematic.
But the fact that, you know, women are raped on public transport, it does point to, I think, a need for there to be a platform to be talking about these issues, because people are feeling threatened on a daily basis.
But is there not a problem, do you think, by characterising things such as unwanted compliments, catcalling, things that, you know, really, they're annoying, yes, but is there not a problem seeing them through the prism of violence and through the prism of sexual violence? And what was interesting, for instance, about the Charlotte Proudman case was that she saw the fact that she was complimented and someone saying that her picture looked stunning. She saw that as an act of sexual violence. And are we not therefore in danger of, you know, demeaning real instances of violence?
I'm very interested in what you're saying, Anna, because I think I've heard a lot of women say this kind of thing, that it is a genuinely quite scary world out there. And what you're saying about women being raped on public transport, now I'm not saying no woman has ever been raped on public transport, but I think we need to be very careful about the statistics. There is no doubt some element of truth in it, but they're very alarmist statements. And if you think about all the people who use public transport every day, your chances of being raped on public transport are absolutely minimal. I mean, less than minimal, teeny, tiny. And yet, when we go around saying things like this, it really does prompt that fear. So I'm not in any way ridiculing your fear. I think the fear that women have, and this is where my problem with feminism really does become apparent, because I think the fear that particularly young women nowadays experience is genuine. And I've certainly spoken to young women in the first year at my university who tell me, how can they possibly leave their bedrooms at night and to go to the library the other side of campus? And my suggestion that of course they can is met by horror, because they said, but there's a rape culture, there's lad culture, and if we leave our bedroom on campus to walk 5 minutes to the library, we might get raped. And I started by laughing at women saying this. I mean, the university I work at is Canterbury, it's the safest place. But then it dawned on me that these women were expressing quite genuine fears. So I'm very interested to tease out where this comes from. I actually don't think, and I kind of disagree with all of you a little bit, I don't think feminism is obsessed with sexual violence. I think the problem with feminism is its obsession with gender and its obsession with seeing everything through the prism of gender. So to come back to this idea that women get raped on public transport, well, men get attacked on public transport. Again, the chances of it happening are very, very small, but actually you're far more likely to be mugged on public transport and have your phone nicked than you are to be raped. And it's far more likely that a man would have his phone nicked on public transport than a woman would be raped. And yet, because feminists insist on seeing everything through this prism of gender, you actually then lose all perspective on what some of the real problems are.
Maybe you need to put in place a more productive way of moving forward with a fear like rape, which you seem to think isn't a valid fear or isn't necessary in today's society. But to simply do that by saying don't complain about it is extremely dangerous.
Well, okay, listen, sorry, let me just absolutely clarify what I'm saying there. Rape is an incredibly serious crime, and I am not sitting here in any way downplaying the severity of the crime of rape. And if you are raped, you complain about it, you go to the police, you do everything you can to get the person who committed that crime against you punished. So I would not want in any way at all to be thought of as demeaning the crime of rape. What I am questioning is the frequency with which it happens. So when we get all the statistics that suggest that we live in a rape culture, actually what's going on, the way those statistics are gathered, and you actually hinted at this in your question to me, you have lots and lots of different things all being conflated. So you have rape at one end, but then you also have groping. Again, not pleasant, but it's not rape. You also have people being called names, and you have all kinds of different things. And when you conflate all of these things together, that's when you can produce statistics like 1 in 4, 1 in 5 women are a victim of sexual assault. Well, is being called a name and being raped, are they really equivalent? And if they're not really equivalent, why are we lumping all of these things together to make statistics like 1 in 5, which genuinely then put fear in women who aren't aware that all of these different issues are being lumped together? You know, there were a lot of very interesting questions there. To start with, this idea, was feminism ever the solution? I mean, I think it depends what problems we're looking at. And I think certainly if we go back a long way in history, there were times when women did not have equality under the law. There was a time when women did not get equal pay. And I'm not just on about a gender pay gap in the way it's talked about today, but if you were a teacher, a school teacher in the 1940s, 1950s, there were genuinely two tracks of pay. So if you were a woman, you were put on one pay scale, and if you were a man, you were put on another pay scale. And this was legal, and this was what happened in every school in the country. Well, those important battles needed to be won. And thank goodness now, eventually, they have been won, and women do now have legal equality. But what's happened is when women achieved legal equality in all these respects that I've just mentioned, the battle has then shifted, and it's shifted away from where are we unequal in the law to what's the problem with men, exactly as you're saying, and looking at different cultural factors that feminists have then targeted as holding women back. And I think things really changed in the 1960s, 1970s, when the feminist slogan became "the personal is political." And this idea that the personal is political, I think, has had a major impact on the type of feminism that we see nowadays, because what they were saying then is that we want to talk about our identity, how our identity is impacted upon by a male identity, by this concept of the patriarchy. I think there is no such thing as patriarchy. This idea that there's a kind of conspiracy of white middle-class men who were getting together, presumably on golf courses and over drinks of whiskey, and conspiring as to how to hold women back, I think is just completely fanciful. Feminists are looking for reasons to say it's men who are holding us back. And as that gradually just does not exist anymore, you have to have these campaigns like Everyday Sexism to legitimise and justify the existence of feminism nowadays. The examples that are held up, I think, become increasingly trivial. So to go back to the Charlotte Proudman thing, the idea that someone says you look stunning and that this then is objectifying women. Well, come on, this is not on a continuum with horrible things going on in the world.
I'm concerned, though, that you're denying my right as a 17-year-old girl to reflect on the world and look at what I see and say that I'm not happy. But if I wake up now and say this is still not good enough, I think I have a right to fight for something different. I also think to suggest that feminists are obsessed with gender is equivalent to saying that people who were in Ferguson, in America, were obsessed with race. We're not setting the agenda that gender is the problem.
At risk of sounding horrible, I'm glad you're not happy. There's lots and lots of things that I'm not happy about, but what's the root cause of these problems? What's the biggest cause of the problems that people face in society today? Personally, I don't think men are the biggest cause of the problems that I face. Both genders want to have a better life for themselves. I would like to see everybody in the world have a better life and be happier. But I don't think we're going to achieve that by pitting one gender against another. I think I have far more in common with many men in the world than I do with many women. And this idea that men and women are two completely separate and completely homogenous groups with vested interests in common, that all women have vested interests in common, opposed to men, and all men have vested interests in common, opposed to women, as a kind of class identity, that there's women as a class and men as a class. I think that's what's holding us back nowadays. I think we're not busy working out how we can make life better for everyone and have a look and see what we've all got in common with each other.
I just wanted to know if you feel that feminism has run its course or it needs to be rebranded or repackaged. I mean, when you kind of look into topics that you touched upon in one of your articles about sort of the sexual language being causing emotional harm to women. I think we're a lot stronger than that. You know, we're not these meek vessels.
I'm really fascinated by this idea that you're saying women seeing themselves as a new kind of class, and this being different to, say, kind of earlier kind of class divisions. But also what I think you get is a kind of individualism when it comes to shaming people who have, you know, failed to toe the line.
I think the problem with the feminism movement today is they're not looking for anything like equal rights. They're looking for special rights, specific rights, which I think is wrong, where we don't need any special privileges over men. We deserve equal footing, and legally, yes, we have got that.
Well, Fraser, I think that's a really excellent example that you raised there of this dichotomy between the way feminism presents women as a class, but then also has a problem with individuals as well, because it's not just individual men that feminism has a problem with, it's also individual women, and it's also the concept of individual women exercising choice, being able to make decisions about their own lives. Because if individual women choose to post topless on the page of a newspaper, take up pole dancing or lap dancing, or do any of the myriad things that some women may choose to do, then feminism does not approve of those choices, and feminism is very quick to come down and say that what they are suffering from, women who make these choices, is internalised misogyny. Now that is incredibly insulting to women who have chosen to make all kinds of different decisions about their lives. So yeah, feminism has a problem with individuals, not just individual men. Feminism, I think, is actually very, very anti-woman. So because I think that it is well and truly time, I think that feminism was consigned to the dustbin of history. There is not one use for feminism today. Feminism completely overstayed its welcome, and we cannot move on and have progress for everyone in society until we ditch feminism altogether. Because of that, because I think that, I actually think, and there's a lot of programmes on the television, you might have noticed, looking at women's historical disadvantage, and I actually think they're really unhelpful as well now. I'm not saying it's not important that we know history, everybody should know history, but this kind of constant harping on about, oh, and it was bad for women in the past. Yeah, it was also bad for men in the past. You know, we kind of need to get over this now, and it's like feminism needs to justify itself all the time by looking for new points, either new places around the world or new points in history where women had it bad, so we can all go around remembering all the time that even if we're not experiencing things bad right this minute, we did have it bad once, or women somewhere in the world have got it bad now. So that, and because women are a class, women are this homogenous group, if some woman in some country 1,000 miles away from here is experiencing things badly, then that obviously impacts upon me because I have something inherently in common with her. Rubbish, absolute rubbish.
Firstly, I would like to say that I would identify as a feminist, and I respect women's right to choose to be sex workers, and maybe you'd say then that I'm not a feminist, I don't know, but I believe that it is a woman's choice to decide to have whatever career she wants to have. I think that feminism is needed in 2015, and I think it's needed because we have more work to do, and I think it's needed because we haven't achieved social, political and economic equality of the sexes.
Could you give me an example of exactly
sure.
where you think women haven't achieved this kind of equality?
Yes. Okay, so I think this is going to seem tokenistic, but you've asked for specific examples. So there was a recent study at Yale University to look into the sort of unconscious assumptions that we have about gender from employers. And they produced identical CV applications, same age, same achievements, same qualifications, exactly the same, but they prescribed to them male and female names, and these recruiters rated male applications significantly more competent and hireable than identical female applications and offered a higher starting salary. Why is it that making a decision to have a family we see as something that's a reasonable explanation for a setback in a woman's career? I interpreted what you said is that women seem to exaggerate sexual abuse or sexual harassment on public transport and in a university campus environment. So I'd like to challenge that by, when a question was posed to a group of roughly 100 women at Cardiff University in March 2013, the questioner asked, who has been sexually abused, and not a single girl put her hand up. There was lots of sort of looking around the room, feeling uncomfortable. Then she said, have you been touched when it was unwanted in a public sphere or a private sphere? Have you had unwanted, vitriolic, offensive comments made at you? Have you ever been made to feel dehumanised and devalued just because of your gender? And every single girl put their hand up. So I think if you look at what the actual definition of sexual abuse is and sexual harassment in public transport, it does incorporate all these things. And I don't think that means we're conflating them together. I think if we say it's acceptable for men to assume power and ownership over women by saying, oh, your tits look great in that top, or whatever they may say when you're walking down the street, which I know to be true and a very common occurrence. It's like the language is the same that's being used to harass women in the street. It's the same language that's being used for women that's being raped. And in this way, it is a continuum.
Frankly, I don't care what people think unconsciously. What I care about is what actually happens in practice. Do fewer women get hired into top posts? Do women get paid less? And the answer to both of those questions is no. So whatever people's unconscious biases are, I really do not care. What matters is what happens in reality. The point I was making earlier about why I think the problem with feminism is not that it classifies everything according to violence, but that it classifies everything according to gender is really well summed up by your example from Cardiff University there. Now, I wonder why those researchers chose to ask those questions to women, why they didn't choose to ask those questions to all students. I suspect every single person here has been touched in a way that was not wanted. If we're really going to reduce sexual assault down to the level of have you ever been touched in a way that was not wanted, part of being a person and going out as an individual, engaging with the world, standing on the tube, going shopping, going for a drink in a pub, engaging in the world as an active person on your own as an individual means that people will say things to you that you do not want to hear. You will be touched. If you go on the tube, you will be touched. Now, that occurs to both men and women. Both men and women have these things happening to them. Now, we can choose how we want to separate up society, and researchers choose the questions that they want to ask. Now, because feminists are, like I said earlier, obsessed with looking at things through the prism of gender, it appears that certain problems affect women more than they affect men. Now, this is just not true. So a recent survey that was carried out of particular interest to me was about academics who are in the middle of their careers, and it said female academics at the middle stage of their careers feel neglected, they don't get opportunities for promotion. Now, you look at that survey and they basically only asked women academics. So the first thought that came to my mind was, why didn't they ask men and women? And I'm absolutely convinced that if you ask men and women academics in the middle stage of their careers, do you feel neglected and not in line for promotion? Both men and women would have said yes. But if you choose to look at everything through this prism of gender, then of course you're going to say, if you only ask women these questions, of course the conclusion you're going to come up with is that these problems affect women disproportionately to men, because you haven't asked the men.
There are two things that you've said that have made me feel quite uncomfortable, and this is that there is no use for feminism at all, and that the patriarchy doesn't exist. So whilst us in our UK British society might feel very comfortable and like we have many opportunities, there are women all across the globe that don't have that privilege. So that perspective that you speak from is from privilege, and do you recognise this? And that the patriarchy doesn't exist, well, there is now in Parliament more men with the name John than there are females, so we are essentially governed by men. So how can you have this point of view that patriarchy doesn't exist in society today?
I agree with your point that feminism really does not belong, doesn't have a place today. And I recently saw an online petition by Amnesty International asking for people to sign up to give justice and protection to these two sisters in India. Apparently they were given a court had given a ruling that because their brother married someone from somewhere else, the sisters would have to be raped and paraded naked in the streets. And there was a big hue and cry about this, and ultimately it was found out that no court in India did this. In India, there is no court that would give any ruling like this. This is not allowed. And if rape was found out, people would be arrested. There is a law against rape. It's a crime in India. And eventually people found out that Amnesty didn't even go to the village, question the villagers, find out who did the ruling. Reuters did. Reuters went and found out that this body, or rather this village council, actually had 80% women from the lower classes. So I'm really confused about why women sitting, or any person sitting in Britain, wants to interfere in the lives of people in developing nations.
Majority of the time when when MPs discuss issues, it happens at like 7:30 p.m. like at times where majority of females are unable to attend because, for example, the stereotype, women have children and whatnot. I just think that also, like, variables like that also play a role.
See, this is something I do agree with you on. I think feminism is very much caught up in gender politics and the gender binary, and I think, of course, it's a lot to do with the fact that it's called feminism. You have a gendered word, you're going to create a gendered section of the community. I think the problem with that in itself is that you're creating a section of the community that you have defined as non-sexist. And to me, not being sexist is common sense, and I think it should be across the board. And therefore, feminism as a word should be thrown in the bin, I think, potentially, because it identifies certain people as having common sense values, i.e. thinking that men and women are equal, and other people that don't have that value. You spend a lot of your time being contrary and... Not contrary, sorry, I don't mean... contradicting the complaints of feminists in a way that is equally as bad as feminists complaining about men. It's equally as bad as feminists complaining about other feminists. And instead we should be moving forward and thinking about how to not divide things so much.
My main problem with feminism is that, like you said, common sense, yes, men and women should be equal. Surely everybody should hold that value. And when my professor at university asked that to a class, everybody put up their hands. But when he then asked who would say they were a feminist, nobody put up their hands. And I think that this word has become associated with extremism and with exclusion as well. And my main problem with a lot of feminism that I have personally come into contact with, and feminists, is that they exclude men from the debate. It's like, because they're not a man, because they're not a woman, and they haven't experienced it, how could you possibly have an opinion on it? How can you possibly talk about it? If you want to talk about gender equality, there needs to be equal voices for men and women in the debate. And I think that's my main problem with feminism. To say that that platform is invalid and it's run its course, I think is a little bit too soon. And I also agree with points about other women around the world. Their lives should impact on me. I should be aware of them, and not just because I'm a woman, but because I'm a human being. So I think that in other countries around the world, those struggles are definitely still being fought. In fact, they're only just being begun.
Just a few quick points. The first point is, let's just completely scrap this thing, I'm afraid, about there being more men in Parliament called John than women, because I'm afraid I don't know where that's come from, but it is completely untrue. The story that I think you're referring to that's been doing the rounds is that there are more male CEOs of businesses in the FTSE 100 company called John than women, but that's a different issue than members of Parliament. It is not the case that there are more members of Parliament called John than there are women members of Parliament. Second thing, just to make absolutely clear, the problem that I have with feminism, the smallest problem I have with feminism is the word. The word is, it's just letters, it's just a word. My problem with feminism is not the word. People can use whatever words they like. My problem with feminism is actually what it stands for. It's actually what is carried out in the name of feminism nowadays, which is about continually reinforcing this idea that women are victims, that we have low self-esteem, that we are vulnerable, that we need protecting, that there is a conspiracy, a patriarchal conspiracy out there, keeping more men called John in positions of power and holding women back. That is what I have an issue with. It's because of that I think that challenging feminism nowadays is not about being contrary. Heaven knows, my life is far too busy to have time just to sit around and thinking of things to be contrary about. For all of us to be able to move on, we need to challenge feminism. It is feminism that's holding people back. And I actually agreed with the points that you're making about me being fairly privileged. I am fairly privileged. I think everybody in this room is fairly privileged. Women in Paraguay have no access to abortion whatsoever. Girls in Paraguay, aged 13 and 14, and I think you've got to be very, very careful about the use of the word girl. One sleight of hand that feminism pulls that really, really annoys me, and when you read about feminism in the news, look out for this. It's this lumping together of women and girls. So it's feminists who talk about violence against women and girls. Now, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not a girl anymore. I was, I'm not now. And I really object to being lumped in with girls, and I really object to the fact that it's feminists who insist on lumping together women and girls as if women and girls are one group who experience the same problems in the same way. You know, I'm not the same age as my daughter, and my daughter experiences life in a very different way to me. So anyway, but girls, so I'm using this word quite deliberately, girls 12, 13, 14 years old in Paraguay who get raped are not allowed to have abortion. It is against the law for them to have abortion. Women in Ireland are not allowed to have abortion. The thing is, right, where are the feminists in this country who are jumping up and down making a fuss about this? Why is it that if I lived in America and I needed to take emergency contraception, I could go to a pharmacy and I could pick it off the shelf and put it in my supermarket trolley? Yet in this country, I would have to go and make an appointment with the doctor, or I would have to go off into a private room to discuss and be told off, essentially, by a pharmacist and be tutted at and told I must be more careful next time. Now that is incredibly patronising, but feminists are not jumping up and down making a fuss about these issues. Feminists are too busy saying, I was sent an email message saying that I looked stunning. There's a poster on the tube of a woman who's too skinny. You know, this is the problem. Now, yes, I'm privileged because I could get an abortion. You know, if my daughter, age 12, heaven forbid, got pregnant, I would make sure she got an abortion and she would not have to go through that. So yes, in that respect, I'm privileged. But that is why I then do not see myself in one homogenous group with these 12-year-olds in Paraguay. And even though from a humanist perspective, I can empathise, I can want to change their situation, I could argue that that situation is wrong, from a feminist perspective, as feminism is used nowadays, I am not in that same situation. That is not affecting me. And yet to say that women are all around the world are a homogenous group ends up eliding my relatively privileged position, or very privileged position in this country, with the experiences of these people all around the world, women all around the world. So what happens then in the feminist sleight of hand, as I see it, is that women, all one big group, women over there have problems, therefore all women have problems. Well, that's not true.
I think, you know, it's interesting to bring up the abortion topic, because this is something that we're told that men should not discuss. Brendan O'Neill, for instance, was basically banned from holding a debate on the issue. And I find it still astonishing that abortion is illegal in Northern Ireland. It is effectively illegal in this country. You need the permission of 2 doctors to approve it. So it's, you know, yes, you can get an abortion, but de facto it's against the law. Do you think it's maybe a kind of a loss of ambition, a loss of big ideas in feminism that is sort of, you know, these are really important issues, and we must tackle these.
You know, you're absolutely spot on, but this is exactly why all the feminist arguments that women are victims plays into the hands and actually stops women being able to have legal rights for abortion. I don't know if people heard, but the Pope came out recently, and wow, very, very good of him, said that women who've had an abortion should be forgiven under Catholicism. Now, his argument for this was that no woman actually wanted to have an abortion. It's because they were victims, and because they'd obviously had suffered some terrible trauma, and that's why they had to have an abortion, therefore they should be forgiven. Now, you didn't see the feminists jumping up and down and arguing against the Pope. 1 or 2 of them said, actually, you know, the Pope's right. I think the Pope's wrong. And the reason why I think he's wrong is because I think having an abortion is not an act of victimhood. Having an abortion can be a really positive, empowering step that you've made, a woman has made, from a completely rational perspective. I'm not a victim, nothing traumatic has happened to me, I'm taking control of my own life, and I'm making this really positive decision that this is how I'm going to move on with my life. The problem is, if feminism is all about saying that women are victims, we can never move to that position of arguing that abortion should be a completely legal right. This is a very good example then of how feminism is holding women back. One of the problems I have with feminism, and this is going to make people who don't hate me completely hate me at this point, I think there's a real problem with feminism and a sense of entitlement. Women, I think, can and should aim to do everything in life, but you have to recognise that doing everything in life involves making some compromises as well. So, yeah, I've got a job and I've got children. What you can't do, I cannot physically be sitting here now talking to you lot and at home with my children at one and the same time. So you have to make some decisions about what you want to do in life. And yes, women's pay does go down when they have children, but of course it does, because if you're choosing, and I'm saying this word very clearly, if you are choosing to not spend so much time at work, to not go for a promotion, then of course you're not going to be paid so much. And you can go away and cry about that and say that that's very unfair, but why should you be paid a fantastic wage or the same wage as a man, if the man is doing more hours and the man is going for a promotion? Now, we can question why women make these choices. Why do women, after they've had children, choose not to go for promotion in such big numbers? Why do they choose to cut their hours? But the demand that women should, or the expectation, the sense of entitlement that women should be able to work fewer hours than men, not go for promotion, and still expect to get the same level of pay, I think women who think that, quite frankly, you need to dream on, because that's not how the real world works.
Despite what I've heard about, you think the trend in feminism is going in a direction that makes us feel weak and victimised. I mean, in reality, I think I'm astonished by how much it's changed just in the last 10 years, and I think it's a really positive thing. And I think maybe the word victim is not something that's weakening anybody, and I think I'm proud to say that sometimes I'm a victim of sexism, and saying the word victim to me doesn't make me feel weak.
What role do you think that, for instance, biological determinism has in this debate, but also there is a kind of new determinism where people are obsessed with early years of childhood? And this is a big trend in psychology, but now you hear a lot of it from feminists saying that, we must have gender neutral toys, and the fact that girls playing with Barbie is what's holding them back from becoming engineers.
I think that modern feminism doesn't say that women are weak and are victims. I think it says that women are strong. And I think feminism as a movement, I would say that it says that everyone is welcome. And I don't think it doesn't allow men to continue in the debate. I think men are welcome.
The reason why women for so long were excluded from higher education, political life, was because they were seen as fragile beings with low self-esteem that did not understood the complexities of politics. Whereas nowadays, modern feminists are using the same arguments to protect women against or from lads' mags, from engaging in debates that could harm or traumatize them in some way. I think that rather than restricting freedom, we should, fight for more freedom for everyone, and that involves hearing and being exposed to things that sometimes we don't agree with, but we argue back. That's the whole point.
I think that feminism of the past made some amazing strides, and we are now living in a society where we have more choice than we've ever had before, and I'm really thankful for that. But I think sometimes feminism of today can victimise women, and I think it can be very, 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 very patronising.
So I'd like to start by coming back to the point that Fraser made about biological determinism, and is biological determinism making a comeback today? I think it's very, very interesting, that point, and I'm not completely sure I've worked out for myself what I think about that, because I think what we have nowadays is a kind of identity determinism where men seem to be able to call themselves women and identify as female, and they can then take on all the supposed oppression that women suffer as well. And everything, I think, has got a little bit confused. Where I do agree with you on where the biological determinism is coming back, and I think this is a really superb point, is about this myth of the early years. And this does tie women down into this view of motherhood. And I think, forget all the stuff about girls being made, people giving children gender-neutral toys and gender-neutral clothes, etc., etc. I think where this most impacts upon women who are adults is the idea that we're kind of walking wombs, where every single thing that we do will have an impact upon the child that we give birth to. So women are not allowed to drink, women are not allowed to eat certain foods, are not allowed to smoke, and this kind of policing of women, often by other women, I think is really unhelpful, and again does hold women back in society. One thing that does actually upset me quite a lot is to come and hear women who are young, who are clearly very, very articulate, very intelligent, beautiful, saying that they're proud to be victims. That sits very, very uncomfortably with me, because I think young women nowadays who are articulate, intelligent, you have the world at your feet. You can go out there and you can change the world. And the more you are determined to say that the proudest achievement is that you're happy to declare yourself as a victim, the less likely you are to be able to go out and change the world. Now, I think all the major gains that have been made for women and for men in recent years, over the past century, have not come about as a result of feminism. They have not come about as a result of women deciding to club together and bring about changes on their own. They have come about of people together recognising what their interests in common are with each other and fighting for their interests collectively. And the more women feel the need to retreat into women-only safe spaces and not get out there and change the world, then the worse the world is for everyone. I want everyone to be able to choose whether or not to have children, when would be the best time to have children, whenever they want, what would be how to juggle careers and children. I want these debates to be available for everyone, and for everyone together to work out what makes a good life, what makes life better. And the best way for us to achieve that is for all these bright young women to get off the victimhood label and to start working with men as equals to change the world for the better for everyone.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I would like to thank Joanna for joining us for this discussion. And if you would like to take part in a further program, please email us.